Why was an 18-year-old girl lying in the dust of a foreign mountain, her eye pressed to a scope aimed at a man 3 miles away? Why did her finger rest against the trigger, steady, unshaken, when every veteran around her whispered the same truth, that what she was about to attempt wasn't a shot at all, but a prayer? The crosshairs trembled against the horizon as slowed her breathing. Wind howled across the Afghan valley, tearing at her uniform, at her hair pressed beneath the helmet. 3 miles away, a figure emerged from a concrete bunker, architect of massacres, of market bombings, of lives ended in places that would never know her name. He stood in the open, believing himself untouchable at this distance. "Target acquired," whispered, her voice barely audible over the gusts. Beside her, Sergeant Mason lowered his binoculars. His hands shook. "That's not a shot. That's a miracle you're reaching for. Wind gusting at 40 knots, cross currents everywhere. You're talking about a 3-mile shot when no one in history has pushed past 2,700 meters." Her pulse stayed even. Her finger touched the trigger as if it had always belonged there. She was 18, from a ranch in Montana, and yet in this moment she was something else. Something history hadn't accounted for. "Command, this is Overwatch 7, she breathed into her headset, requesting permission to engage primary target at extreme range. Static crackled before a woman's voice broke through, "Colonel Hayes." Calm, sharp, with steel beneath it. "Confirm your range estimation." 4,800 meters, ma'am. Wind south-southeast at 42 knots, gusting to 55. Temperature differential -34. Compensation dialed in for northern hemisphere rotation. A long silence. Finally, Hayes responded, clipped and heavy. "No sniper in history has confirmed a shot beyond 2,700. You are asking permission to attempt nearly double that. Explain to me why I should allow this." His jaw tightened. She thought of the countless hours under Montana's wide skis, the ranch fatting under drought and debt, the targets no one else believed possible, targets she had made fall again and again, until obsession became destiny. "With respect, ma'am," said softly, never leaving the scope, "no 18-year-old girl from Montana has ever been deployed here either. But here we are." Mason glanced at her, disbelief etched into every line of his weathered face. He'd seen men fold under less pressure. Yet this girl, she was steady. But before the trigger broke, before history bent itself to her will, her mind carried her backward, to the place where all of this had begun. 6 months earlier, she was stacking hay bales under the endless Montana sky. The rifle leaned against the fence post, a Winchester .270, older than she was, passed from grandfather to father, now resting in her hands as if carved for her grip. Prairie dogs dotted the far field, little flashes of movement against dry earth. She measured wind, calculated drop, and pulled the trigger. The crack rolled across the valley. 800 yards away, the target disappeared. "Show off," her younger brother muttered, trudging over with a bucket of oats. Was 16, broader than stubborn as their mother, but he lacked her impossible gift for the rifle. "Dad wants to know if you're coming to town for the recruiter meeting," he added. She lowered the rifle, eyes lingering on the hills. Recruiter meeting. Army, sending someone to the high school. Graduations next week. Half the seniors don't have college money or jobs lined up. Mom thinks it might be worth hearing what they have to say. The thought of leaving Montana should have felt like betrayal. Instead, it felt like possibility. That night the family gathered at the kitchen table, the same oak surface worn by 3 generations. Bills spread across the wood like battle reports. Her father's hands, rough from ranch work, turned bank notices over as if flipping them could change the numbers. "We've got maybe 6 months before the bank takes the ranch," he said. "I'll pick up more shifts at the mill. It won't be enough." His mother reached across, her strength quiet but present. "We'll figure something out. We always do." But saw the truth in their eyes. The land that had carried their family for decades was bleeding them dry. The Army's offering signing bonuses, said suddenly, her own voice startling her. Special programs for exceptional shooters, enhanced benefits. Her father looked up sharply. You've never been further than Billings. You're 18. I can outshoot every hunter in 3 counties, she said. Grandpa always told me skill is currency. Maybe it's time I spent mine. The silence stretched. Finally, her mother's voice broke it. What kind of programs? Had already researched them, laptop open late into the night. Sniper training, marksmanship units, special operations support. They pay well, they cover education. Her brother leaned in, eyes bright. You mean sniper school? That's serious stuff, Em. I'm a serious shooter. Her father stood, packing to the window, staring at the fields under moonlight. Your great-grandfather fought in World War II. Your grandfather served in Vietnam. I did 2 tours in Desert Storm. Service takes something from you, even when it gives something back. Maybe, she answered quietly. But sitting here, watching this ranch die, it's already taking something from us. The next day, in the high school gym where had once played basketball and delivered her valedictorian speech, she found herself at a recruiter's table. Sergeant Frank, crisp uniform, measured tone. When she handed him her shooting records, scores, groupings, wind compensation calculations, his demeanor shifted. These are real, he asked, scanning the papers. Every one documented. You've been hitting sub-2-inch groups at 800 yards, consistent 1-mile shots with hunting rifles. Where did you learn this? My grandfather taught me. The land taught me the rest. Studied her face, her steady eyes, the confidence that belied her age. Miss, do you know what sniper school is? It isn't summer camp. It's designed to break people who think they're tough. Dropout rate, over 70%. I've been supporting my family since I was 12, hunting since 14. Every competition within 200 miles I've won for 3 years straight. I don't break easily. A long pause. Then his voice softened, almost conspiratorial. There's a qualifying shoot at Fort Harrison next week. Show up with proof of your scores. If you pass the screen, I'll make sure your application gets serious eyes. Shook his hand. I didn't come to hear why I might not qualify. I came to find out how to enlist. On the drive home, the Montana landscape stretched infinite outside her window. Wheat fields, mountain ridges, skis too wide to hold her restlessness. Her phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, her best friend. Still think you're crazy, but I support you're crazy. Smiled faintly. Sarah had always been the balance, cautious where was reckless. Yet even Sarah's words couldn't dull the fire starting to burn. That night found herself in the ranch's old shed, dust drifting in shafts of light. She unlocked her grandfather's footlocker. Inside, uniforms, medals, letters, and a leather-bound journal. Ballistic tables, calculations, diagrams that belonged decades in the future. And tucked away, a brass compass, engraved with words that stopped her breath. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. Her hands trembled. Her grandfather hadn't just been a soldier. He had been something more. A marksman whose legacy had been hidden, classified, buried under silence. And suddenly her path no longer felt like escape. It felt like inheritance. At Fort Harrison, the evaluation was brutal. Candidates with rifles worth thousands lined up, confident. Brought her old Winchester, modified with care but still a hunting rifle in their eyes. They smirked. By the time she finished her grouping at 800 meters, a cluster so tight it could be covered with a quarter, the smirks were gone. Jesus Christ, one whispered. Master Sergeant walked over, expression unreadable. Where did you learn to read wind like that? Hunting elk in the mountains. You learn to read it or you go home hungry. He studied her, narrowed his eyes. Your grandfather was Richard. Her chest tightened. Yes, why? Said nothing more, but something in his face told her there was a history here. A history she hadn't yet been told. That night back on the porch, turned the compass over in her palm, the words catching the fading light. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. And though she couldn't yet know it, that aim was already drawing her toward a battlefield half a world away, toward a shot that no one believed was possible. Toward the moment, 6 months later, when her finger would tighten on a trigger against the Afghan wind, and the world would change with a single bullet. Why did the Army take such interest in one farm girl's shooting scores? Why did doors open faster for her than for recruits twice her age, carrying years of experience? Couldn't shake the thought as she rode the bus to Fort Benning. The recruiter's words echoed, the ones he'd left hanging like a shadow. Some talents run in families, and the Army has always been interested in those talents. The bus rumbled through Georgia heat, miles of pine forest stretching endless on both sides. Around her sat other recruits, boys with buzz cuts and bravado, girls stealing their nerves, men older than she was trying to mask doubt with jokes. Sat straight, hands folded over her bag, eyes forward. Her grandfather's compass rested in her pocket. Each bump of the road seemed to remind her of it. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. She whispered the words under her breath as if they were prayer. When the bus doors opened, the air hit like a furnace. Drill sergeants were already shouting, corralling the new arrivals into neat chaos. Fell into line, every instinct to disappear, to not stand out. But standing out had always been her curse. Basic training was designed to break people down before building them up. Recruits stumbled through push-ups, ran until their lungs tore, fumbled weapons they'd never held before, endured it all with quiet resilience. The labor on her family's ranch had built muscles the Army couldn't comprehend. The cold Montana mornings had trained her lungs to work harder than Georgia's humid heat could demand. But when the first weapon qualification came, anonymity shattered. Sergeant Vega barked the order, her voice sharp as steel. On the line. Shouldered the M4 carbine, heavier and foreign in her hands compared to the Winchester she'd grown up with. She checked the sights, breath steady. Around her, recruits trembled, missed targets, swore under breath. Her first shot punched center mass at 300 meters. The next grouped the same. A full magazine emptied with surgical precision. The drill sergeant studied the target, not a single miss, not even close. Explain yourself, Vega demanded, eyes narrowing. First time firing an M4 and you score expert qualification like it's a carnival game. Kept her voice even. Principles are the same, Sergeant: sight alignment, breathing, trigger control, follow through. Vega said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. By nightfall, whispers spread through the barracks. Montana farm girl shot perfect scores, doesn't miss. Some admired, others resented. Attention, realized, could be as dangerous as failure. Weeks blurred. She ran faster, climbed higher, shot than most. And the more she excelled, the more eyes turned her way. One evening, while cleaning her rifle, her bunkmate Jessica glanced over. Jessica was one of the few who treated her like a peer instead of a curiosity. "You know you're a rumor now, right?" she asked, brushing carbon off her own weapon. Looked up. Rumor. They're saying you've got some kind of sixth sense, that you feel the wind, predict bullet paths. Some think you're lucky. Others think, Jessica hesitated, others think you're not normal. Lowered her gaze. She thought of her grandfather's journal, of equations written decades ahead of their time, of medical notes she hadn't understood, abnormal neural processing, enhanced spatial cognition, words that didn't feel like luck. But she said only, "I just practice." Jessica studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Practice, right. By the 6th week of training was pulled aside. A separate evaluation, they said. Advanced marksmanship. The instructors didn't tell her why, only that she'd be firing at distances far beyond the standard recruit. At the range, Master Sergeant waited, the same man from Fort Harrison who had asked about her grandfather. He handed her a precision rifle, heavier than anything she'd held. "Targets up to 1,200 meters," he said. Accuracy, time, adaptability, begin. The first target at 800 meters, easy. She squeezed and the steel clanged. At 1,000, her first shot drifted 6 inches wide. She adjusted, fired again, center. Then 1,200 meters, beyond anything she had ever formally attempted. The wind shifted unpredictably. Sweat trickled down her cheek. She steadied her breath, made the adjustments by feel more than thought, and pulled the trigger. The spotter called out, "Hit, center mass." Silence followed. Instructors exchanged glances. Approached. Your group at 1,200 meters measured 11 inches. Do you understand what that means? She shook her head slightly. It means you just did what some seasoned snipers can't achieve after years. That doesn't happen by chance. Felt her chest tighten. So what does it happen by? Studied her. Sometimes it's skill, sometimes it's something else. He didn't elaborate. But that night, when returned to the barracks, she sat awake long after lights out. The whispers of Artemis, the strange questions about her eyesight, the hidden history in her grandfather's trunk, threads weaving into something bigger than she could yet see. The choice came sooner than she expected. After graduation, she was summoned to a sterile room deep inside the base. Across the table sat Colonel Hayes, the same voice she'd heard months later through the radio in Afghanistan. His presence filled the room, every metal on his chest weightier than words. "Private," he said evenly, "what do you know of your grandfather's service?" Her throat tightened. "Not much, sir. I know he fought in World War II. That's all my family ever told me." Hayes slid a file across the table. Black and white photos, reports, a name written over and over, Richard. "Your grandfather," Hayes said, "was part of a classified program. We called it Artemis, a study of individuals with unusual aptitudes for precision shooting." Stared at the photos. Her grandfather young, uniform crisp, rifle in hand. "He had something rare," Hayes continued. "A genetic marker that altered visual processing. Faster, sharper, an intuitive grasp of ballistics no textbook could teach. With it, he accomplished things the Army never admitted publicly, things that shouldn't have been possible." His hands trembled against the file. "And you think I have it too?" Hayes leaned forward. "You don't just think in trajectories, you see them. The evaluation reports say you make calculations in real time without conscious effort. That's why Fort Benning accepted you immediately. That's why you're here." Her pulse hammered in her ears. "So what happens now?" "Now you choose," Hayes said. "You can follow the standard path, advanced sniper training, operational deployment, or," his voice dropped, "or you enter the program your grandfather once served. Artemis, still unofficial, still buried in shadows, harder than anything you've endured, but it would use every ounce of what you are." Stared at the compass in her hand, the words engraved by a man who had walked this path before her. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. She thought of her family, the ranch barely clinging to survival. Of her grandfather, the soldier she'd never known, carrying secrets into his grave. Of herself, standing on the edge of something larger than she could name. "I need time," she whispered. "You have 24 hours, Hayes replied. "That's all I can give. Tomorrow the next Artemis cycle begins." That night, lying in her bunk while the barracks hummed with restless energy, couldn't sleep. She turned the compass over and over in her palm, each reflection catching her eye like a flicker of fate. Was this destiny, or was it simply desperation wrapped in myth? She didn't know yet, but morning was coming, and with it, the choice that would change everything. Why did the compass feel heavier that night than it ever had before? Why did 4 words etched into brass weigh more than the rifles, more than the uniforms, more than the endless voices telling her she was different? True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. She whispered it in the dark, as if her grandfather were listening. Morning came too soon. Colonel Hayes's office was colder in daylight, stripped of mystery, its fluorescent lights buzzing like impatient insects. He didn't waste words. "Have you made your decision?" His throat was dry. She thought of Montana, of her family clinging to a ranch held together with duct tape and prayer. She thought of her grandfather's hidden journal, of equations decades beyond their time. She thought of herself, staring down a future that was coming whether she was ready or not. "I'll join Artemis," she said. Hayes didn't nod, didn't smile. "Understand this. You are volunteering for something you can never speak of, not to your parents, not to your brother, not even to soldiers who fight beside you. Once you step across this line, there is no unknowing." "I understand, sir." He studied her for a long moment, then finally spoke. "Then your life just stopped belonging to you." That afternoon, a black transport van collected her from the training barracks. No insignia, no destination given. Jessica, her bunkmate, her only real friend in basic, watched from the barrack steps, confusion written across her face. Wanted to wave, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. The door slammed shut and Jessica's silhouette vanished. The ride was long, silent, every window blacked. She had no watch, no phone, nothing to measure time except her own thoughts. By the time the van stopped, night had fallen. The facility was underground. Corridors smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Cameras turned with silent precision. Felt like she was walking into the marrow of the earth, into a place designed for secrets. 6 others waited in the briefing room. 5 men, 1 woman, none older than 30. Their eyes carried the same sharpness she'd seen in herself in the mirror. Predators who hadn't asked to be born that way, but were. "Candidates," a voice snapped. Captain Lisa, stern, unflinching, her posture sharp enough to cut glass. "Welcome to Artemis. If you think this is sniper school, you're wrong. If you think this is about shooting, you're wrong. This is about control of your body, your mind, your instincts. The weapon comes last. You come first." Studied the others. 1 man flexed his jaw, too confident. Another tapped his knee, nerves vibrating. The woman, older, mid-20s, dark hair pulled back tight, caught his eye and gave the faintest nod. No judgment, just recognition. The training began before dawn. Days bled into one another. Physical exhaustion wasn't the goal, it was the baseline. Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, endless calculations shouted in her ear while her body trembled with fatigue. They tested her eyesight under strobing lights, measured reaction times with machines she didn't understand. They put her in simulation chambers where wind roared and digital targets flickered across screens at impossible ranges. Most nights she collapsed on the bunk, muscles shaking, mind screaming. And yet, when the rifle was in her hands, calm returned, as if the storm outside her body had no power over the storm inside her focus. That was when she noticed it. The way she could sense the wind shift before the flag moved. The way she could feel bullet drop not as numbers, but as instinct, as if her body knew the arc of steel before it left the barrel. One night stopped her after a drill. "Do you know why you're here?" Hesitated. "Because I can shoot, ma'am." His eyes narrowed. "Plenty of people can shoot. That's not what this is. You process differently. You don't calculate, you perceive. That's why Hayes wants you. That's why this program exists." Swallowed hard. "Is that supposed to make me feel proud?" His expression softened just slightly. "It's not about pride, it's about weight. You'll carry it. You'll wish you didn't, but you won't have a choice." The days grew harsher. Team exercises forced them into pairs, spotter and shooter. Was matched with a quiet, analytical candidate from Ohio with strong technical skills but uneven shooting. "I know I'm not you," admitted one night as they reviewed ballistic charts. "But I can spot better than most. If you trust my math, maybe I can keep up." Studied him, he wasn't flashy. He didn't carry arrogance like armor, he carried steadiness. "Deal," she said. Together, they began outperforming the others. His precise calculations balanced her instinctive reads. Her impossible accuracy gave his numbers purpose. For the first time, felt less like an anomaly and more like part of something bigger. But not everyone welcomed her. David, a former athlete with family ties in the military, made no effort to hide his contempt. He sneered at her in hallways, muttered under his breath during drills. One night in the armory, he leaned against the bench where she cleaned her rifle. "Must be nice," he said, voice dripping with false casualness. "Everyone else bleeds for these scores and you just show up, makes a guy wonder." Kept her hand steady on the cleaning rod. Wonder what? Wonder what strings are being pulled. Nobody gets this kind of attention without connections. Unless the army's just parading you around to prove a point. Look, even girls can do it. Her jaw clenched. My scores speak for themselves. "Sure," he said with a short, ugly laugh. "For now." The next day, during a combat stress drill, noticed her scope felt wrong. Off by a hair, checked it, frowning. Elevations shifted half a minute. Windage too, subtle, someone been in your gear. She thought of smirk. There wasn't time to recalibrate. She adjusted by instinct, compensating with each breath. The shots landed, not perfect but lethal enough. Later, confronted with security footage, he didn't deny it. "Women don't belong in special operations," he spat. "You're right about one thing," replied coldly. "You don't belong here," was gone by nightfall. But his parting words lingered. "There are plenty of people who don't want you here. I'm just the one who got caught." That night, Staff Sergeant Rico Martinez, an instructor who had been watching her closely, found cleaning her rifle. "How did you know the scope was off?" he asked. "Half a minute of angle most wouldn't have noticed." Hesitated. She thought of her grandfather's medical report, the phrases about abnormal neural processing. She thought of Hayes's words, "Your brain calculates like breathing." But she said only, "It didn't feel right when I looked through it." Martinez studied her, unconvinced but didn't press. Instead, he said, "You'll be deploying soon. Afghanistan, forward operating base Chapman. Real missions, real consequences." The words sank in heavy. Training had been a crucible, but deployment, that was war. "You're ready," Martinez said. "But remember something. Whatever made you special back in Montana, don't lose it trying to become what you think a soldier should be." That night couldn't sleep. The others snored, shifted, muttered in dreams. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought of hatred, of quiet trust, of warning that excellence could be isolating. She thought of her parents, still fighting for the ranch, unaware that their daughter was being molded into a weapon. She thought of her grandfather's compass, still warm against her skin. And she realized the truth. This wasn't about marksmanship. It wasn't even about the army. It was about inheritance, of blood, of burden, of secrets that ran deeper than she had ever imagined. The next phase wasn't training. The next phase was war. Why did her hands tremble hours after the firefight had ended, when they hadn't trembled at all while the bullets were flying? Why did calm find her in the storm, only to abandon her in the silence that followed? Sat on the edge of her bunk inside a converted shipping container at forward operating base Chapman, her rifle stripped and cleaned, her body still vibrating from the day's violence. It had been her first real mission. The morning began in darkness, the helicopter blades chopping the air as her team lifted into the Afghan sky. Staff Sergeant Rico Martinez, steady as ever, briefed them again as the mountains rose around them. "We're providing overwatch for a patrol in village. Intelligence suggests weapons caches, maybe fighters moving through. Our job is eyes and precision, nothing else." Nodded, silent, her compass pressing against her chest inside her uniform pocket, adjusted his spotting scope beside her. She could sense his nerves, though he hid them well. They landed near dawn, dust swirling in golden light. The patrol, a dozen soldiers from the 173rd Airborne, moved carefully toward the village, and Martinez climbed to their position on Hill 472, a rocky ridge overlooking the valley. From there, the village looked almost peaceful. Children played in the dirt streets. Women carried baskets. Men tended livestock. It was too normal. Overwatch, this is Ranger 6, Lieutenant Foster's voice crackled over the radio. Beginning compound search. Maintain eyes. Copy, Martinez replied. We've got you covered. Settled behind her rifle, breathing slow, her world shrinking to the scope. 800 meters to the village center. Clear fields of fire, called ranges and wind. She tracked the patrol through her glass, noting every shadow, every figure in the streets. Then came the shift. Raised voices, footsteps running, metal clinking, the unmistakable rhythm of weapons. Movement East Ridge Line, muttered, voice tight. 5 figures, one carrying what looks like an RPG. Through her scope found them. Men moving tactically, spreading out, eyes fixed on the village. One knelt, unwrapping the launcher, angling it toward the patrol. Her pulse slowed, the world narrowed. Ranger 6, this is Overwatch, Martinez said sharply. Hostile intent confirmed. RPG team preparing to fire. Request permission to engage. Overwatch, Ranger 6 copies, take the shot. The crosshairs steadied on the gunner. Distance, 1,200 meters. Wind gusting 15 knots southeast. Called corrections, his voice like an anchor. Breath once, twice, then squeezed. The shot broke, 2 seconds of flight. The man crumpled, the launcher tumbling from his hands, clattering against stone. Target down, confirmed. But the others scattered, returning fire. Bullets cracked the rocks around her position, stone chips slicing her cheek. She shifted, engaged again. One down at 800. Another at 1,400, the farthest shot she'd ever made under fire. Below, the patrol scrambled for cover, then began pulling out under Martinez's orders. The firefight dragged 20 minutes, dust and chaos, firing until her shoulder bruised from recoil. When it ended, 3 enemies lay dead by her hand. Victory, they would call it. But in her bunk that night, it didn't feel like victory. She saw their faces, men who had tried to kill her comrades, yes, but men all the same. She saw the way one's hands had clutched his chest as he fell, the way another had stumbled back like any boy struck too soon. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Appeared at her door, silent at first. Finally, he sat on the bunk opposite, studying her. You okay? She lifted her eyes to him. I keep seeing them over and over. I made the right calls, I know that, but they're still dead because I pulled the trigger. He nodded slowly. What you're feeling, it means you understand the weight. Don't lose that, but don't drown in it either. Her voice cracked. Does it get easier? No, admitted. But you learn to carry it. You learn to live with the faces without letting them stop you from protecting your own. Martinez joined them then, 3 cups of bitter coffee in his hands. His voice carried a veteran's gravity. I've seen 2 kinds of soldiers, the ones who kill and feel nothing, and the ones who feel too much. Neither survives long. You need balance. Remember, today you saved American lives. That's the truth, don't forget it. She sipped the coffee, bitter and grounding, her chest tightening around the words. Over the following weeks, her reputation spread. Soldiers whispered about the 18-year-old who had made impossible shots on her first mission. Infantry platoons requested her Overwatch specifically. Intelligence officers passed her name up the chain. Becoming a legend, said once, shaking his head with half a smile. But with recognition came danger, not just from enemies but from within. She overheard it in the chow hall, soldiers muttering, some in awe, others in resentment. She thinks she's, kid's cocky, won't last. Was she cocky? She asked herself the question nightly, cleaning her rifle until the metal gleamed. Confidence had grown, yes, but beneath it lay fear. Fear that one mistake, one missed calculation would cost lives. That fear sharpened her, but it also pressed down on her chest like a stone. Then came the mission that tested her like nothing before. The target, a Taliban commander coordinating ambushes against convoys. Smart, experienced, always one step ahead. Intelligence had failed to eliminate him 3 times already. Now it was turn. During the briefing, Martinez looked her squarely in the eyes. This man is not a fool. He survived because he's careful. Overconfidence will get us killed. Do you understand? She nodded, but inside, part of her whispered, I can make the shot. The compound lay in a valley, surrounded by steep ridges. His team trekked 6 hours under cover of night, positioning themselves on a hillside 1,500 meters away. It was the longest shot she had ever faced. Wind swirled through the valley, unpredictable. Red conditions, his calculations constant. It's at the edge of our capabilities, he said. If you miss, they'll know where we are. I won't miss, replied. She settled behind the rifle. Through her scope, she saw him, the commander, stepping into the courtyard at dawn, speaking with lieutenants, unaware that history had just bent its gaze upon him. Range 1,500 meters. Wind, southeast 18 knots gusting to 25. Breath, the world slowed. The trigger broke. 2 seconds later, the man collapsed, lifeless in the dust. Target down, confirmed, all in his voice. But celebration was brief. Fighters poured from the compound, dozens scanning for the shooter. Bullets cracked against stone near their position. Martinez barked orders. Pack up, move. They scrambled, adrenaline burning through exhaustion. For 2 hours they evaded pursuers, slipping through jagged ravines, listening to enemy voices echo across the mountains. Finally, extraction arrived, helicopter blades cutting through thinning clouds. They climbed aboard, breath ragged, hearts pounding. Back at Chapman, Major Stone debriefed them. Exceptional work, she said. You eliminated a commander responsible for dozens of American deaths. You've done your country a service. Nodded, but her chest was hollow. That night, as she cleaned her rifle, she wrote in her journal, training teaches you the math. Combat teaches you the faces, and the faces never leave. She set the rifle down, pulled the compass from her pocket and turned it in her hands. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. She whispered the words again, but for the first time she wondered if her heart could bear the weight of every aim, every shot, every life it demanded. Why did the soldiers in the chow hall stop talking when she walked in? Why did their eyes follow her, some with admiration, some with quiet resentment? Had become more than a name at Forward Operating Base Chapman. She had become a story. The 18-year-old with the impossible shot. The girl who sees the wind. Death at 1.5 miles. She heard it whispered as she passed. She saw the way younger soldiers looked at her as if she were myth made flesh. And yet, inside was no myth. She was a girl carrying faces she could not forget, shoulders bruised from the recoil of her choices. Martinez noticed it first. You're slipping, he told her one evening, voice low, as she cleaned her rifle in the fading light. Her eyes snapped up, slipping. You're starting to believe your own story. Don't. The second you think you can't miss is the second you do. She swallowed hard, bristling, though she knew he was right. I'm careful. You're young, he countered. That's not the same thing. But warnings had a way of fading when glory whispered louder. The next mission was supposed to be simple overwatch. A convoy resupply, vulnerable to ambush in the pass, and Martinez were positioned high above the road, scanning the ridges. Wind tore through the valley, gusting 30 knots, shifting every few seconds, muttered constantly, adjusting readings. This is chaos. If they attack from range, shots will be unpredictable. They won't, she said too quickly. They'll be close. They'll want to make it messy. But's eyes tightened. You don't know that. Hours passed. The convoy crawled along the dirt road, armored trucks grinding over rocks. Then movement. Contact, Martinez called. North Ridge, 6 figures setting up. Swung her scope, found them instantly. They moved fast, disciplined, heavy weapons braced. I can take them, she said, already dialing adjustments. Range 1400, said. Wind is shifting, wait. We don't have time. She steadied her breath, calculated instinctively, and fired. The shot cracked, echoed, missed. The fighters scattered, returning fire. The convoy below erupted into chaos, bullets striking metal, explosions ripping the road. Shouted frantic, "Correction, 2 mils left, 1 up." She adjusted, fired again. This time the man collapsed. Another shot, another hit, but the damage was done. 1 truck was burning, 2 soldiers wounded. By the time the fight ended, silence pressed heavy on the ridge. Martinez's jaw was tight, his eyes cold. What the hell was that? She swallowed, throat raw. "I thought I had it." "You thought," he snapped. "You gambled with lives because you believed your own legend. Don't you ever do that again." His words cut deeper than the recoil ever had. Back at Chapman, the wounded were flown out. Stood in the med bay, watching a young private fight for breath, blood soaking the sheets. She hadn't fired the bullet that struck him, but hadn't she, in a way, created the moment for it? Later that night, alone in her bunk, she pressed the compass against her chest, whispering the words she no longer believed. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. Her heart felt clouded, pride and doubt twisting together. Found her there, staring into nothing. He sat quietly before speaking. "You missed 1 shot, it happens." "It cost lives," she whispered. "Maybe, but don't confuse guilt with accountability. Learn from it or it'll eat you alive." His calm steadied her, but Martinez's disappointment lingered heavier. The following days brought more missions, more overwatch, more kills. Hit targets again, restoring trust in her team. But inside, a crack had formed. Doubt whispered at the edges of every shot. One night under the desert stars, she confessed it aloud. "What if was right? What if I don't belong here? What if I'm just a farm girl pretending to be a soldier?" Martinez, sitting across from her, surprised her with his answer. "You think I've never missed? You think I've never gambled wrong and watched men bleed for it? Every sniper who's ever breathed has failed. What makes you a soldier isn't perfection. It's whether you keep showing up when perfection dies." His voice softened. "But don't forget humility. Pride kills faster than bullets." She nodded, but the weight didn't lift. The real test came weeks later, on a mission no one wanted. Intel reported a high-value meeting, Taliban leaders gathering in a compound north of. The opportunity was rare, too valuable to miss. But the distance was extreme. Nearly 2 miles. Beyond doctrine, beyond precedent. Command hesitated, but Hayes's voice came through, steady, firm. "It's the only one who can attempt this." Her chest tightened, the legend again. They moved out before dawn, crawling into position across a barren ridge. The compound lay small in the distance, heat shimmer distorting its walls. Unfolded his charts, his hands shaking. "This is insane. We're talking nearly 3,500 meters, wind variance alone." "I can do it," interrupted. Martinez glared. "Don't you dare repeat the convoy mistake, if you fire without perfect data." She breathed steady. The scope aligned. The figures in the courtyard moved, unaware that history was staring at them. But her finger froze. She remembered the private in the med bay, blood bubbling at his lips. She remembered Martinez's fury, his doubt. She remembered her own trembling hands in the bunk after her first kills. And she realized pride was pulling the trigger, not duty. Slowly she lifted her head from the scope. "Not today," she whispered. Martinez stared at her, shocked. "Explain yourself." "Conditions aren't right. Wind's unstable. I won't gamble this shot." Exhaled, relief flooding his face. "Thank God." Command wasn't pleased. The meeting dissolved before air support could arrive. The opportunity slipped away. Back at base, Hayes called her in. His voice was sharp, but his eyes betrayed something else. "Do you know what you've done? That was a chance to end months of bloodshed." She stood tall, though her voice shook. "And I knew the shot wasn't clean. I chose not to risk lives on arrogance." Silence, then Hayes leaned back. For the first time, you sound like a sniper instead of a child with a gift." The words cut and soothed all at once. That night lay awake, the compass warm against her skin. The moral whispered through her like wind through dry grass. Sometimes the greatest aim is the one you don't take. But she also knew this was only a reprieve. Larger storms were coming. Missions that wouldn't allow hesitation. Shots that would define not only her legend but her soul. Why did silence feel more dangerous than gunfire? Why did the quiet of the Afghan night carry a weight heavier than the echoes of battle? Lay awake in her cot at Fob Chapman, staring at the thin metal ceiling above her. She could still hear the words Hayes had spoken weeks before. For the first time, "You sound like a sniper instead of a child with a gift." They should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a warning. The legend of had grown, too fast, too loud, and legends attracted envy as much as they did admiration. She first noticed it in whispers, snide remarks in the chow line, muttered jokes during briefings. The Golden Girl, Hayes's pet. Soldiers who bled daily under the same sun resented her shadow stretching across their sacrifices. She had expected it from enemies. She hadn't expected it from her own. The mission that broke everything started like any other. Overwatch for a village sweep outside. Intelligence suggested insurgents stockpiling explosives in abandoned homes. Routine, but nothing in war is ever routine. And Martinez climbed into position before dawn. The ridge gave them full view of the valley. The patrol below moved carefully, clearing compounds one by one. At first it was quiet, then stiffened. "Look, West Ridge." Through her scope she saw them. 6 figures with rifles moving fast, closing on the patrol's flank. She aligned her crosshairs, calm settling over her. She squeezed miss. Her breath caught. She adjusted, fired again, another miss, rounds cracking wide. "What the hell?" hissed. "Your zero's off, something's wrong with the rifle." Martinez swore under his breath. "Compensate now." Forced herself steady, dialing corrections manually. Finally, her round found its mark, one hostile down, the rest scattering. She picked them off one by one, but not before 2 soldiers in the patrol below fell screaming to the dirt. When the dust cleared, checked her weapon, his face darkened. The scope's been tampered with, elevation knob stripped half a click, deliberate. Stomach twisted, sabotage. Back at Chapman, Martinez tore through the armory logs. Only a handful of soldiers had access. One name stood out, the same who had been removed months ago for trying to undermine her. But this wasn't, he was long gone. Someone else had picked up where he left off. That night Martinez pulled aside. His voice was low, urgent. "You need to understand, the enemy isn't just out there. You're a threat to careers, to reputations. Someone here wants you gone. Stay alert." The weight crushed her chest. She had always accepted danger from bullets, from bombs, from ambushes. But betrayal, from her own side, that was a wound no armor could stop. The next mission came sooner than expected. A high-value raid deep in hostile territory was Overwatch again beside her. Martinez led the ground assault team. The air was heavy that night, the kind of silence before storms. "Eyes open," Martinez said before moving out. "Trust your instincts and each other." For hours tracked shadows across her scope, murmuring ranges and adjustments. Then it happened. A flash of movement. Muzzle fire from a ridge opposite theirs. "Sniper!" shouted, ducking as a round ricocheted near his head. Swung her rifle, scanning. The enemy sniper was well hidden, disciplined. Each shot cracked closer, forcing her down. She breathed, forcing calm, searching for the glint of glass, the hint of movement. Then there, a shimmer of heat, a fraction of a second. She fired, the shot punched true, silence followed. But victory was fleeting. Over the radio, chaos erupted. "Martinez is down. I repeat, Martinez is hit." Her chest seized. "Where?" she shouted. "Courtyard compound 3. He's bleeding bad." Through her scope she found him. Martinez on the ground, blood soaking his uniform, soldiers dragging him into cover. The firefight still raging around them. Her hands shook for the first time since Afghanistan began, grabbed her shoulder. Focus, cover them. She fired until her barrel smoked, cutting down fighters closing on the team. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Finally, air support arrived, blasting the compound, scattering the survivors. The team extracted Martinez still unconscious, his blood staining the stretcher. Back at base, the medics worked through the night. Sat outside the infirmary, rifle across her lap, compass in her palm. She whispered the words like a prayer, over and over. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. Hours later, the surgeon stepped out. His eyes told her before his words did. "I'm sorry, he didn't make it." The world collapsed. Barely remembered the days that followed. The funeral at dawn, the folded flag, the way the bugle cut through the desert air like glass in her chest. Soldiers stood in silence, some with bowed heads, some with distant eyes. Stood beside her, his jaw trembling, hands clenched. When it was over, didn't speak. She walked to the edge of the base, staring at the mountains Martinez had walked so many times. The compass felt heavier than ever. She had lost the one man who believed in her balance, the one who taught her that humility mattered more than legend. And beneath her grief, suspicion gnawed, the sabotaged scope, the whispers, the quiet enemies in her own ranks. Martinez had warned her. Now he was gone. That night found her sitting alone in the dark. He didn't try to comfort her. He simply sat silent, letting the weight breathe between them. Finally, he said, "You don't have to carry this alone." Her voice was raw. "He believed in me more than I did in myself, and now he's dead because I couldn't protect him." Shook his head. "No, he knew the risks, we all do. Don't dishonor him by blaming yourself." She closed her eyes, tears finally spilling. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." He reached out, placed her compass back in her hand. "Then do it for him. Carry what he taught you. Because if you stop now, everything he gave you dies too." Clutched the compass, the brass warm against her palm, the engraving cutting into her skin. That night, for the first time, she wasn't sure the words were true. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. Her heart was broken, and broken hearts don't aim straight. Why did the base feel so empty without his voice? Why did every corridor echo louder now that Martinez was gone, moved through Fob Chapman like a ghost? Soldiers nodded to her, some even offered quiet condolences, but their words slid off her like rain on glass. Nothing penetrated. She barely ate, she barely slept. At night she sat with the compass in her hands, its brass warm from her grip, its engraving sharp against her thumb. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. She whispered it until the words lost meaning. The legend still grew, even as she shrank inside it. The girl sniper, the record breaker. She hated every whisper now. What was a record when Martinez lay in Afghan soil, his laughter buried with him? Stayed close, but even he couldn't bridge the gap between her silence and her grief. One night, he finally broke it. "You're slipping away," he said softly. "Martinez wouldn't want this. He believed in you." Her voice was flat. "Martinez is dead because of me." "No," insisted. "He's dead because this is war, because none of us get to control how it ends. But if you let it break you, then his death loses meaning." She looked at him, eyes hollow. "Maybe I don't want meaning anymore." For the first time, didn't argue. He just sat beside her, silent, sharing the weight. Days bled into each other. Missions came and went, and though she still performed, still hit shots, still saved lives, the spark inside her was dimmed. Her commanders noticed. Hayes noticed. Finally, Hayes called her in. His tone was sharp, but his eyes betrayed something softer. "I don't care what your reputation says. Right now, you're a liability. You're distracted, broken. And in this line of work, that gets people killed. You need to decide if you're staying in this fight or walking away." She opened her mouth, but no words came. He leaned forward. You think I don't know what Martinez meant to you? I do. But soldiers die. The only choice you have now is whether you carry him with you or you bury yourself beside him. She left without answering. That night she packed her bag. For hours she sat staring at it, her exit plan. A ticket home to Montana. Back to the ranch, back to silence. No more shots, no more legends, no more wait. But as dawn broke, she heard his voice in her memory. If you stop now, everything he gave you dies too. Her hand closed around the compass. She unpacked the bag. The call came 2 days later, a mission unlike any other. Intelligence had located the engineer, a Taliban mastermind responsible for IED networks that had claimed hundreds of lives. He was heavily guarded, always moving, never staying in one place long enough to strike. But a source reported he would be at a remote valley compound for 48 hours. This was the chance. The catch, the shot would be extreme, over 2,000 meters, beyond doctrine, beyond standard engagement range, the kind of shot that existed in theory, not practice. Command hesitated, but Hayes said it plainly, is the only one who can do this. Her chest tightened, the legend again, but this time the legend was her only shield against despair. She said yes. The night before the mission sat with her under the stars. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally he asked, "Are you ready?" She turned the compass in her hands, the engraving catching moonlight. "No, but I'll never be ready. That's not how this works." He nodded. "Then maybe that's what makes you ready." Dawn crept over jagged peaks as they moved into position. The compound was small, hidden in a valley ringed by cliffs, and crawled into place on a rocky outcrop nearly a mile and a half away. She set up her rifle, checked and rechecked every detail. Wind gauges, barometric pressure, temperature shifts. Charts sprawled around them, his voice steady, calm. But inside wasn't calm. Her heart pounded, grief and fear tangling together. She thought of Martinez, and the sabotage, of Hayes's ultimatum, of her family back home, never knowing what she was doing in these mountains. And she thought of the faces of the men she had killed. Would the engineer's face join them? Would it haunt her the same way? The sun rose higher. At 9:30 hours, movement stirred in the compound. Guards shifted. And then there he was, the engineer, stepping into the courtyard, surrounded by lieutenants, his voice carrying across the stone. His voice was tight, urgent. Range, 2,340 meters. Wind 8 knots northeast, gusting 10. You'll need almost 40 moa of elevation. This is beyond anything we've trained for. Her cheek pressed against the stock. Her eye found the scope. Her finger hovered over the trigger. But doubt roared inside her. What if she missed? What if she failed? What if Martinez's death had hollowed her out too much to ever fire true again? Her breath quickened. Her hands trembled. Whispered, "Look at me." She pulled her eye from the scope, met his gaze. "You've always seen it different," he said softly. "Not as math, not as numbers, as instinct, as heart. Trust it. Trust what Martinez saw in you. Trust what you already are." Her throat tightened. She pressed the compass against her chest, whispered the words once more. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. Then she settled back behind the rifle. The engineer stood in the courtyard, unaware that his life balanced on the breath of an 18-year-old girl who had already carried more weight than most men twice her age. The crosshairs steadied, the world slowed. She inhaled, she exhaled, and she squeezed. What does a heartbeat sound like when the world holds its breath? Lay prone on the ridge, her cheek against the stock, her finger brushing the trigger. Through her scope, the courtyard blurred and cleared with every rise of her lungs. 2,340 meters of air, wind, and doubt stretched between her and the man who had built weapons from shadows, the engineer. His voice murmured steady numbers beside her, but she barely heard him. The math was background noise. Instinct spoke louder. The way the wind tugged at her hair, the shimmer of heat above the courtyard walls, the rhythm of the man's steps. One breath. Two. Three. She squeezed. The rifle cracked. The recoil pressed into her shoulder, familiar and final. Then silence. 2 full seconds of it, long enough to wonder if she'd failed, long enough for her doubts to scream. And then, through her scope, she saw it. The engineer staggering, confusion flashing across his face before gravity pulled him to the ground. His lieutenants rushed to him, panic cutting their formation into chaos. Target down, breathed awe thick in his voice. His pulse didn't surge. It slowed. The shot was perfect. The kind of shot that snipers tell stories about long after the war ends. But perfection felt hollow. "Pack up," she whispered. The exfiltration was chaos. Guards flooded the valley, firing blindly toward the ridge. Bullets snapped overhead, ricocheting off stone, and crawled low, rifles clutched tight, breath burning in their lungs. When the extraction helicopter finally rose from behind the ridge, they sprinted, sliding into the bay as gunfire chased the rotors. Back at Chapman, command erupted. Radios buzzed with news of the kill. Analysts celebrated. Hayes himself pulled her aside, his stern face cracked by something like pride. He said, voice low, "You just changed the course of this war. You'll never hear it in headlines. You'll never see it in books. But remember, dozens of soldiers will live because of what you did today." She nodded, silent. That night, she sat alone with her rifle across her knees. She ran her fingers along the barrel, still warm in her memory. A rifle that had taken more lives than she could count, and now one life that would echo louder than all the rest. Entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside her, offering one. "You made history today," he said softly. "History doesn't keep you warm at night," she replied. "No," he admitted, "but it keeps others alive to go home. That has to count for something." She stared at the compass in her hand, the engraving glinting in the lamplight. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. She wondered if her heart had been the one to pull the trigger, or if war had hollowed it out so much that only instinct remained. Days passed. Reports filtered in, ambushes disrupted, IED attacks dwindling. The engineer's network crumbled without him. Soldiers who never knew her name lived because of her shot. And yet, the faces of those she had killed still returned at night. Martinez's absence still tore through her. His betrayal still whispered that enemies wore her own uniform as often as the enemy. She wasn't a legend. She was a girl with blood on her hands and a compass in her pocket. Weeks later, as her deployment wound down, she stood on the airstrip at Chapman. Helicopters thumped in the distance, the smell of dust and jet fuel heavy in the air. Stood beside her, duffel over his shoulder. "You think they'll ever tell this story?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, they'll bury it under reports and footnotes. That's how it works." "Doesn't bother you?" She looked at the horizon, the sun setting over jagged peaks. "No, legends don't belong to people like me. I don't need a story. I just need to live with myself." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That might be harder than any shot you'll ever take." She almost smiled, almost. On the flight home, she sat by the window, the mountains fatting into clouds. She pulled the compass from her pocket one last time. She thought of her grandfather, of the way he had carried it through his wars. She thought of Martinez, of every soldier who had stood beside her. And she thought of the words, not as a mantra, not as a burden, but as truth. True aim comes from the heart, not just the eye. Because sometimes aim wasn't about bullets. It was about choices, about when to fire, about when to hold, about what to carry and what to let go. Closed her eyes as the plane cut through the clouds, her breath steady for the first time in months. She wasn't whole, she might never be, but she was still here, still breathing, still carrying the weight. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.